William stood in front of the tall mirror in their bedroom at Kensington Palace, adjusting his navy blue tie for what felt like the 100th time that morning. His hands would not stop shaking, no matter how many deep breaths he took. The reflection, staring back at him, looked tired and worried, with dark circles under his eyes that makeup could not hide. He had always been good at keeping his emotions in check during public appearances, but today was different. Today felt like everything might change. Kate sat on the edge of their bed, holding the official letter in her trembling hands. She had read it so many times over the past 3 days that she could recite every word by heart. The heavy cream paper bore the golden seal of Buckingham Palace, pressed deep into the wax with the authority of centuries. The message was brief and formal, written in the old-fashioned language that the palace still used for important matters. Their Royal Highnesses the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are hereby requested to attend an urgent meeting at Buckingham Palace. On the morning of the 15th day of November, this matter concerns issues of the utmost importance to the Crown and the continuity of the royal line. Your immediate and absolute discretion is required. No staff or security detail beyond the essential minimum shall accompany you. Kate looked up from the letter and watched her husband struggle with his tie. William was usually so calm and controlled, the steady one who helped her through difficult times. Seeing him this nervous made her own anxiety grow stronger. She stood up and walked over to him, gently pushing his hands away from the tie and fixing it herself with steady movements. "We have faced worse things than this," she said softly, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Remember the early days, when the press followed us everywhere? Remember when we had to deal with all those rumors and stories they made up about us?" William looked down at his wife and managed a small smile. Kate always knew exactly what to say to make him feel better. Her calm blue eyes and gentle voice had gotten him through many difficult situations over the years. But this time, he could see that she was just as scared as he was, even though she was trying to be strong for him. "This is different, Kate," he said, placing his hands on her shoulders. "The Queen's private secretary sounded so strange on the phone yesterday. He would not give me any details about why we are being summoned. He just kept saying that it was a matter of extreme urgency and that we would understand everything once we arrived." Kate nodded, remembering the phone call. She had been sitting right next to William when he answered, and she could hear the tension in the secretary's voice, even from across the room. The man had been working for the royal family for over 20 years, and Kate had never heard him sound so formal and distant before. Usually he was warm and friendly when he spoke to them, asking about their children and making small talk about their various charitable activities. But yesterday, his voice had been cold and professional, like he was reading from a script. He had refused to answer any of William's questions about the nature of the meeting, simply repeating that all would be explained in due time. When William had asked if they should bring any documents or if there was anything they should prepare for, the secretary had paused for a long moment before saying that no preparation would be necessary, and that they should simply present themselves at the palace at precisely 10 o'clock in the morning. Kate walked over to the window and looked out at the gardens of Kensington Palace. The November morning was gray and cold, with thick clouds hanging low in the sky. The trees had lost most of their leaves, and the bare branches looked like dark fingers reaching up toward the heavy sky. Even the usually beautiful gardens looked somehow ominous and forbidding in the dim light. She thought about their children, who were safely at school, unaware that their parents were facing what might be the most important day of their royal lives. George, Charlotte, and Louis had eaten their breakfast as usual, chattering about their plans for the day and their upcoming school projects. Kate had hugged each of them a little tighter than normal when they left for school, though she had not explained why. William joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind. They stood there in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts and fears. The palace grounds were unusually quiet, with only a few staff members visible in the distance. Even the normal sounds of London traffic seemed muted and far away. "Do you think it has something to do with the succession?" Kate asked quietly. "Maybe there are some legal issues we do not know about, or perhaps there are new responsibilities they want to discuss with us." William shook his head. "Slowly, I thought about that too. but this feels bigger than just paperwork or new duties. The way they are handling this, all the secrecy and urgency, it reminds me of something my father told me once about special family meetings that happen very rarely. He said there were certain things about being royal that could only be explained at the right time and in the right place. Kate turned around in his arms to face him. What kind of things? I do not know, William admitted. He would never give me details. He just said that every generation of royals eventually learns certain truths about what it really means to wear the crown. He said these truths were not written down anywhere and were only passed on through direct conversation between family members. The clock on their bedside table chimed 9 o'clock, reminding them that they needed to leave soon. Their driver would be waiting downstairs in 15 minutes to take them to Buckingham Palace. Kate took one last look around their bedroom, as if she was trying to memorize how everything looked before they left. She had a strange feeling that when they returned home later that day, everything might be different somehow. William picked up his jacket from the chair and put it on carefully. Kate gathered her purse and coat, checking to make sure she had everything she might need. They walked to the door of their bedroom together, then stopped and looked back one more time. Without saying anything, they both felt that this might be the last normal moment they would have for a very long time. The heavy wooden door creaked open slowly, revealing a room unlike anything Kate and William had ever seen inside Buckingham Palace. Mr. Harrison stepped aside and gestured for them to enter, but he remained in the hallway himself. The room beyond was dimly lit by several old-fashioned oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Kate hesitated at the threshold, suddenly feeling very afraid of what they might find inside. "Please enter, your royal highnesses," Mr. Harrison said in his formal voice. "You are expected." William took Kate's hand and squeezed it gently before stepping through the doorway first. Kate followed close behind him, staying so near that she could feel the warmth from his body. The moment they were both inside the room, they heard the door close behind them with a solid thud that seemed to echo for several seconds. When Kate turned around to look back, she was shocked to discover that Mr. Harrison had not followed them into the room. The space they found themselves in was much larger than it had appeared from the hallway. The ceiling stretched high above them, disappearing into shadows that the lamplight could not reach. Ancient tapestries hung on the stone walls, their colors faded with age, but still showing intricate scenes of battles, coronations, and other important events from centuries past. The air smelled strongly of old parchment, leather, and something else that Kate could not identify, but that reminded her of very old. Churches in the center of the room stood an enormous wooden table that looked like it had been carved from a single massive tree. The surface was covered with papers, books, and scrolls, many of which appeared to be extremely old. Some of the documents were written in languages that Kate did not recognize, with strange symbols and decorative borders that seemed to glow faintly in the LAMP, LIGHT. Kate and William stood near the door, neither of them quite brave enough to venture further into the mysterious room. They could hear soft sounds coming from somewhere in the shadows beyond the table, like the rustling of papers or the quiet turning of book pages. William called out tentatively, his voice sounding small and uncertain in the vast space. "Hello. We were told that someone was waiting for us here." The rustling sounds stopped immediately, and the room became completely silent except for the gentle flickering of the oil lamps. Kate felt her heart beating so loudly that she was sure anyone in the room would be able to hear it. She moved even closer to William, practically hiding behind his shoulder as they waited for some kind of response to his call, after what felt like several minutes, but was probably only a few seconds. They heard the sound of a chair being pushed back from the table. Slow, measured footsteps began moving around the far side of the enormous wooden surface, though they still could not see who was making them. The footsteps were soft but deliberate, like someone who was very old but still moved with purpose. An authority figure emerged from the shadows on the far side of the table, and Kate gasped so loudly that the sound echoed through the room. Standing before them was a woman who looked exactly like the portraits of Queen Victoria that hung in the main corridors of Buckingham Palace. She was shorter than Kate had expected, with gray hair pulled back in a style that had been fashionable more than a century ago. Her black dress was made of heavy fabric and decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the lamplight as she moved. But this could not possibly be Queen Victoria, Kate told herself. Queen Victoria had died in 1901, more than 120 years ago. This had to be someone else. Perhaps an actress hired to portray the famous queen for some kind of historical presentation. But as the woman came closer, Kate could see that her face was not made up with theatrical makeup, and her movements were not those of someone playing a role. The woman who looked like Queen Victoria smiled warmly at the shocked couple and spoke, in a voice that carried a slight accent from a time long past. "Please do not be frightened," she said gently. "I know this must be very confusing for both of you. Please come closer and sit down. We have much to discuss, and I imagine you have many questions." William found his voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Who are you? How is this possible?" The woman gestured toward two chairs that seemed to have appeared beside the great table, though Kate was certain they had not been there moments before. The chairs looked comfortable and inviting, upholstered in deep red velvet that matched the woman's dress. "I am exactly who you think I am," the woman replied calmly. "I am Victoria, Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, Empress of India. And before you ask how this is possible, let me assure you that death is not the end for those who wear the crown. It is simply a transition to a different kind of service." Kate felt her knees become weak, and she was grateful when William guided her toward one of the chairs. She sank into it gratefully, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing and hearing. This had to be some kind of elaborate joke or test, but everything about the situation felt completely real and serious. As Kate settled into her chair, she noticed that there were other figures moving in the shadows around the edges of the room. She could not see them clearly, but she could sense their presence, like people watching from the darkness beyond the reach of the lamplight. The thought that there might be other impossible figures lurking in the shadows made her feel even more frightened and confused. Queen Victoria seemed to notice Kate's distress and spoke in a soothing tone. "I know this is overwhelming, my dear. When I first learned these truths, I too was frightened and confused," I said. "But you must understand that this knowledge comes with the responsibility of wearing the crown. Every monarch, every heir, must eventually learn what it truly means to serve the realm." William leaned forward in his chair, his practical nature helping him find his voice despite the impossible situation.
What do you mean by serve the realm?
"What kind of service are you talking about?" Victoria's expression became more serious, and she folded her hands in front of her on the table. "The crown is more than just a symbol of earthly power, William. It is a sacred trust that connects the living world with forces and responsibilities that most people cannot even imagine. We are guardians, protectors of secrets and knowledge that have been passed down through generations of rulers." Kate finally found the courage to speak, though her voice was shaking. "But you died more than a century ago. How can you be here talking to us?" Victoria smiled again, but this time there was sadness in her expression. "As you understand, it is not the end for those who have worn the crown. We continue to serve, to guide, and to protect. The living monarchs rule the earthly kingdom, while we who have passed on guard the deeper mysteries that keep the realm safe from dangers that exist beyond the physical world." As Queen Victoria finished speaking, the shadows around the edges of the room began to shift and move. Kate gripped the arms of her chair tightly as more figures started to emerge from the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized face after face from the portraits that lined the walls of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. King George VI stepped forward first, looking exactly as he had in the official photographs from the 1940s. His naval uniform was perfectly pressed, and his kind eyes held the same gentle expression that Kate remembered from the pictures she had seen of William's great-grandfather. Behind him came Queen Elizabeth I, her elaborate red dress rustling as she moved, the famous white makeup and jeweled headdress unmistakable even in the dim lamplight. William stared in complete amazement as King Henry VIII appeared next, his massive frame filling the space as he walked toward the table. The infamous king looked powerful and intimidating, just as Kate had always imagined him from history books. more figures continued to emerge from the shadows, creating a gathering of monarchs that spanned centuries of British history.
This cannot
"Be real," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible in the hushed room. "This has to be some kind of dream or hallucination." Queen Victoria heard her words and shook her head gently. "I understand your disbelief, Catherine. When I first experienced this transition after my earthly death, I too thought I must be dreaming. But this is very real, and it is the most important truth you will ever learn about what it means to be part of the royal bloodline." King George VI approached William with a warm smile. "My dear great-grandson," he said in the familiar voice that William had heard in old radio recordings,
you
"have grown into a fine man, and I am proud of the husband and father you have become. But now you must learn about the duties that extend far beyond anything you have been taught." William stood up from his chair, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. "Grandfather George, I do not understand any of this. How are you here?" "Are all of you here?" Queen Elizabeth I stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had ruled during one of England's greatest periods. "The crown is not merely a piece of metal and jewels, young prince. It is a conduit, a connection between the world of the living and the realm of the eternal. When a monarch dies, their earthly body may perish, but their spirit remains bound to the crown and to the sacred duties of protection." Henry VIII moved closer to the table, his voice booming through the chamber. "For over 1,000 years, the rulers of this land have served as guardians against forces that would destroy not just the kingdom, but the entire world. We are the barrier between the realm of mortals and the dark powers that exist beyond." Kate felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was hearing. "What kind of dark powers?" she asked, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. Queen Victoria opened one of the ancient books that lay on the table before her. The pages seemed to glow with their own light as she turned them, revealing text written in gold ink and illustrations that moved and shifted like living things. Throughout history, there have been entities and forces that seek to cross into our world and bring chaos and destruction. They are drawn to places of power, and there is no greater concentration of earthly power than the British crown. King George VI nodded solemnly. "Every ceremony, every tradition, every ritual that seems outdated or meaningless to modern people serves a purpose. The changing of the guard, the crown jewels, the ancient words spoken during coronations. They are all part of a complex system of protection that has kept these dark forces at bay for centuries." William sat back down heavily, his mind struggling to process everything he was hearing. "Are you saying that every king and queen has known about this? That my grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, knows about all of this?" "Your grandmother has been one of our most dedicated guardians," Queen Victoria replied with obvious pride. "She has spent her entire reign strengthening the barriers and maintaining the ancient protections. She has sacrificed much to keep the world safe, though the public will never know the true extent of her service." Elizabeth I moved to stand beside Victoria, her eyes fixed on Kate. "And now, Catherine, you must understand that you too are part of this sacred duty. When you married William, you became more than just a duchess. You became a guardian, a protector of secrets that could destroy the world if they fell into the wrong hands." Kate felt tears forming in her eyes. "But I am not royal by birth. I am just an ordinary person who fell in love with William. How can I possibly be part of something so important?" Henry VIII surprised everyone by laughing, a sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think it was an accident that you and William met? You believe it was mere chance that brought you together? The crown calls to those who are meant to serve, regardless of their birth. You have always been destined for this role, even before you knew it yourself." Queen Victoria stood up and walked around the table to stand directly in front of William. "And Kate, the living monarchs rule the earthly kingdom, dealing with politics, ceremonies, and public duties. But we who have passed beyond continue to guard against the supernatural threats that most people never see or suspect. We work together, the living and the dead, to maintain the balance between worlds." King George VI placed a gentle hand on William's shoulder. "Your father knows some of these truths, but not all. Each generation learns only what they need to know at the time they need to know it. Now that you are approaching the time when you may inherit the throne, you must be prepared for the full weight of responsibility. The room fell silent as William and Kate absorbed the enormous implications of what they were being told. Kate looked around at the assembled monarchs, seeing the weight of centuries of sacrifice and duty in their faces. These were not just historical figures, but eternal guardians who had given up their rest to continue protecting the world. "What exactly do you need us to do?" William asked finally, his voice steady, despite the fear and confusion he felt. Queen Victoria returned to her seat at the table and opened another ancient tome. "First, you must learn to see beyond the physical world. There are signs and warnings that only trained eyes can recognize. You must learn to identify the supernatural threats that may try to infiltrate through our defenses." Elizabeth I nodded, in agreement. "And you must learn the ancient rituals and words of power that have been passed down through generations of monarchs. These are not mere ceremonies, but practical tools for maintaining the barriers between worlds." Henry VIII's expression became grave. "Most importantly, you must never speak of these matters to anyone who has not been initiated into these mysteries. The knowledge we share with you today could cause panic and chaos if it became public. The people of Britain and the world must be protected not only from the supernatural threats we guard against, but also from the fear that would come with knowing these threats exist." The black Range Rover pulled away from Kensington Palace exactly at 9:30 in the morning, just as the palace schedule had demanded. William sat in the back seat next to Kate, both of them staring out their respective windows as London passed by in a blur of gray buildings and busy streets. The driver, James, had been working for the royal family for 15 years, but today he seemed different. He had greeted them with a simple nod, instead of his usual warm smile and cheerful conversation. About the weather or current events, Kate noticed that James kept glancing at them in the rear view mirror with an expression she could not quite read. It was not his normal look of respectful attention, but something more like concern or even pity. She wondered if he knew something about their destination that they did not. The thought made her stomach twist with worry. The drive through London felt longer than usual, even though they were taking the same route they had traveled hundreds of times before. The familiar landmarks seemed somehow different today, as if Kate was seeing them through new eyes. Hyde Park looked darker and more mysterious than normal, with its bare winter trees creating strange shadows on the ground. Even the busy shoppers and tourists on the sidewalks seemed to move more slowly, like everything was happening in a dream. William reached over and took Kate's hand in his. Her fingers were ice cold, despite the warm temperature inside the car. He squeezed gently, trying to give her some comfort, but his own hand was trembling slightly. Neither of them spoke during the entire journey. What was there to say when they had no idea what they were walking into? As they approached Buckingham Palace, Kate could see the familiar red-coated guards standing at their posts outside the main gates. But today, there seemed to be more security than usual. Additional guards were stationed at points where she had never seen them before. Several men in dark suits were speaking quietly into small devices attached to their ears. The increased security made the whole situation feel even more serious and frightening. The car passed through the main gates and continued round to a side entrance that Kate had only used a few times before. This was not the grand entrance where they usually met with the Queen for formal occasions, but a smaller, more private door that was typically reserved for very confidential meetings. James parked the car and got out to open their door, but his movements seemed stiff and formal, completely different from his normal, relaxed manner. "Their Royal Highnesses are expected," James said simply, gesturing toward the entrance. "Someone will meet you just inside the door." William and Kate stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance together. Kate could feel her heart beating so fast that she was sure everyone around her could hear it. The palace loomed above them, its massive stone walls and countless windows making her feel very small and vulnerable. She had been coming to this palace for over 10 years, but today it felt like she was approaching it for the first time. The heavy wooden door opened before they could knock, revealing a man Kate had never seen before. He was tall and thin, with gray hair and a serious expression that made him look much older than he probably was. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, and he wore a small golden pin on his lapel that Kate did not recognize. "Your Royal Highnesses," the man said with a formal bow. "I am Mr. Harrison, Private Secretary to the Crown Archives." I have been instructed to escort you to your destination." Kate had never heard of the Crown Archives before, and she could see from William's expression that he was equally confused. The royal family had many different departments and offices, but this was something entirely new to both of them. Mr. Harrison turned and began walking down a corridor that Kate had never seen before, despite her many years of visiting the palace. The hallway was much narrower than the grand corridors she was used to, and the walls were lined with portraits that looked much older than the usual royal paintings. These were not the familiar faces of recent monarchs that she recognized, but much older figures dressed in clothing from centuries past. The men and women in the paintings seemed to watch them as they walked by, their eyes following Kate and William's movement down the hall. The lighting in this part of the palace was dim and subdued, coming from old-fashioned wall sconces rather than the bright chandeliers found in the main areas. The air felt cooler here, and Kate could smell something that reminded her of old books and ancient paper. It was not unpleasant, but it was definitely different from the usual clean, fresh scent of the main palace areas. As they walked deeper into this unknown section of Buckingham Palace, Kate began to notice that the decorations on the walls were changing. The gold leaf and ornate moldings of the main palace were being replaced by simpler, more austere decorations. The carpet under their feet was thick and dark, muffling the sound of their footsteps. The overall effect was to make her feel like they were moving backward in time, leaving the modern world behind and entering something much older and more mysterious. Mr. Harrison moved with quick, confident steps, clearly familiar with these hidden corridors. He did not offer any conversation or explanation, simply leading them deeper into the maze of hallways. Kate tried to keep track of the turns they were making, but after several minutes she realized she was completely lost. If she had to find her way back to the entrance on her own, she would not be able to do it. William was also studying their route carefully, his training as a future king having taught him to always be aware of his surroundings. But even he was having trouble following the complex path they were taking. The palace was much larger than most people realized, with many areas that were never shown to the public or even to most royal family members. After what felt like an eternity of walking, Mr. Harrison finally stopped in front of a heavy wooden door that looked much older than anything else they had seen in the palace. The door was made of dark oak and was covered with intricate carvings that seemed to tell some kind of story. Though Kate could not make out the details in the dim light, Mr. Harrison produced an ornate brass key from his jacket pocket and inserted it into an equally ornate lock. The key turned with a loud click that echoed through the narrow hallway, and Kate felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever was behind this door, she knew it was going to change their lives forever. As William and Kate stood wearing their training crowns, the entire chamber began to transform around them. The ancient stone walls became transparent, revealing the true extent of the magical realm that existed beneath Buckingham Palace. Vast libraries stretched out in every direction, filled with books that wrote themselves and scrolls that glowed with living text. Floating platforms carried other royal figures from different time periods, all working together to monitor and protect the world above. Kate could see through her enhanced vision that golden threads of light connected every person in the chamber to points of light scattered across the globe. She realized these connections reached out to every royal residence, every crown property, and every place where the monarchy held influence. The network was like a giant web of protection that covered not just Britain, but extended to Commonwealth, countries, and former colonies around the world. "This is the true crown estate," Queen Victoria explained, gesturing to the endless magical realm that surrounded them. "Every castle, every palace, every royal residence you have ever visited exists, in both the physical world and the supernatural dimension. When you walk through Windsor Castle or Sandringham House, you are also walking through powerful centers of magical energy." King George VI approached a floating desk covered with documents that appeared to be updating themselves with fresh information. "Every few seconds, your training will take place here, in this realm between worlds. Time moves differently here, so you can spend months learning while only hours pass in the world above. Your children will never know you were gone." William felt a surge of relief at hearing this. The thought of leaving George, Charlotte, and Louis for an extended period had been weighing heavily on his mind.
How long will our training take?
He asked. Queen Elizabeth I smiled at his concern. That depends on how quickly you learn to master your new abilities. Some royals have required years of training, while others have grasped the essential skills in a matter of weeks. The crown chooses each person for their unique strengths, so I suspect you both will prove to be quick learners. Henry VIII walked over to another section of the magical realm where Kate could see training areas set up like obstacle courses. But instead of physical challenges, these courses seemed designed to test mental and spiritual abilities. Glowing symbols floated through the air, and trainees had to identify which ones represented threats and which ones were harmless. Your first lesson will be learning to distinguish between different types of supernatural entities, Henry VIII explained. Not all otherworldly beings are dangerous. Some are neutral, and a few are actually helpful to our cause. The malevolent ones are extremely dangerous and must be stopped before they can influence events in the physical world. Kate watched as other royal trainees practiced what appeared to be meditation techniques, but she could see streams of energy flowing from their crowns to various points around the chamber. What are they doing? She asked. They are learning to direct protective energy to specific locations, Queen Victoria replied. When a supernatural threat appears anywhere in the world, we can channel power through the royal network to strengthen local defenses or even banish dangerous entities back to their own realm. A young woman who looked like a medieval princess approached their group, her own training crown glowing brightly. Your Royal Highnesses, she said with a curtsy. I am Princess Margaret, daughter of Henry VII. I have been training here for several months and I wanted to welcome you to our sacred duty. William was amazed to meet yet another royal ancestor who had been dead for centuries, but was very much alive in this magical realm. How many of us are there? He asked. Every royal who has ever lived continues to serve here, Princess Margaret replied. Some focus on training new arrivals, others specialize in monitoring specific types of threats. And the most experienced among us lead missions into dangerous supernatural territories. Kate felt overwhelmed by the scope of what they were being asked to join. Will we still be able to live our normal lives? Will we still be able to raise our children and fulfill our public duties? Queen Victoria placed a reassuring hand on Kate's arm. Of course, my dear. The living royals must continue to maintain their earthly responsibilities. That is part of what provides power to our magical network. Every public appearance you make, every charity event you attend, every time you represent the crown in the physical world, you are strengthening the supernatural protections. King George VI led them to a viewing area where they could observe the magical wall more closely. Kate could see that the supernatural threats they had noticed earlier were now being addressed by teams of royal guardians. The dark shadow in Scotland was being surrounded by points of light, while the strange lights over the Tower of London were being contained by what appeared to be invisible barriers. This is a relatively quiet day, George VI explained. Most supernatural incursions are small and can be handled quickly. But occasionally, we face major threats that require the combined efforts of dozens of guardians working together. Elizabeth. I opened a leather-bound journal and showed them pages filled with detailed records of supernatural events throughout history. Every threat we have ever faced has been documented here. You will study these records to learn how different types of entities behave and what methods are most effective against them. William studied the journal pages with fascination. He could see entries describing supernatural events during major historical periods, including both world wars, the plague years, and other times of crisis. Were supernatural forces involved in those conflicts, he asked? More than you might imagine, Henry VIII replied gravely. Dark entities often try to influence human conflicts to create more fear and chaos. Part of our job is to minimize their impact and help guide humanity toward peace and stability. As the day of training continued, Kate and William learned to use their enhanced vision to identify different types of supernatural signatures. They practiced channeling protective energy through their crowns and began to understand the complex rituals that helped maintain the barriers between worlds. When they finally removed their training crowns hours later, both felt fundamentally changed by the experience. They had gained knowledge and abilities that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. But they had also accepted a burden of responsibility that was almost too enormous to comprehend. Queen Victoria walked them back toward the chamber door as their training session came to an end. "You have done well today," she said with obvious pride. "But this is only the beginning. You will return here regularly for continued training, and eventually, you will take on leadership roles in protecting the world from supernatural threats." As they reached the door, Kate turned back to look at the assembled monarchs one last time. "Thank you for trusting us with this knowledge," she said sincerely. "We will do everything in our power to be worthy of this responsibility." The door opened to reveal Mr. Harrison waiting patiently in the corridor outside. To him, they had only been in the chamber for a few minutes, though they had experienced hours of training and revelation inside. As they walked back through the hidden corridors of Buckingham Palace, William and Kate knew that their lives would never be the same. They were no longer just Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, but guardians of secrets that could save or destroy the world. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier, but they also felt honored to carry on a tradition of protection that stretched back through centuries of royal sacrifice and service. Queen Victoria lifted her hand and gestured toward the far wall of the chamber. Kate and William turned to look where she was pointing and watched in amazement as the stone wall began to shimmer and change. What had appeared to be solid rock, just moments before now, showed a clear view of the outside world, but not the London they knew. Instead, they could see scenes from across Britain and around the globe, as if they were looking through dozens of magical windows all at once. "This is how we watch and protect," Queen Victoria explained calmly. "From this chamber, we can observe any place where the royal influence extends. We can see threats as they develop and take action before they become dangerous to the living world." In one of the magical windows, Kate could see a dark shadow moving across a field in Scotland. The shadow seemed to have a life of its own, creeping along the ground in a way that made her skin crawl. In another window, strange lights were dancing over the Tower of London, pulsing with colors that hurt to look at directly. A third window showed what appeared to be people walking through the streets of London, but their movements were too stiff and unnatural to be human. King George VI noticed Kate's frightened expression and moved to stand beside her chair. "Do not be afraid of what you see, my dear. These threats have always existed, and we have always been here to stop them. The difference is that now you can see them for what they truly are." William stood up and walked closer to the magical wall, studying the strange scenes playing out before him. "How long have these things been happening? Have I been walking around London my entire life without knowing that these creatures were nearby?" Queen Elizabeth I joined him at the wall, her elaborate dress rustling as she moved. "The supernatural world exists alongside the natural world, but most people cannot see it. Their minds simply refuse to accept what they are not prepared to understand. Only those with royal blood, or those who have been awakened to the truth, as you have today, can perceive these threats." Henry VIII pointed to one of the windows that showed a group of shadowy figures gathering around Buckingham Palace itself. "See there," he said in his booming voice. "Even now, dark forces are drawn. Two places of power. They can sense the presence of the crown and the authority it represents. But they cannot enter because of the protections we have maintained for centuries." Kate stood up and joined William at the magical wall, though she kept close to his side. What would happen if these protections failed? What would these creatures do if they could enter our world freely? The assembled monarchs exchanged serious glances before Queen Victoria answered. "Chaos beyond imagination," she said simply. "These entities feed on fear, despair, and conflict. They're able to influence world leaders, start wars, or corrupt those in positions of power. The human race would destroy itself within a matter of years." King George VI opened another of the ancient books on the table, revealing pages covered with diagrams and symbols that seemed to move and change as Kate watched. "This is why the royal ceremonies are so important," he explained. "Every time the crown jewels are displayed publicly, every time the queen appears in her ceremonial robes, every time the national anthem is sung, the magical protections are strengthened." William stared at the moving diagrams with fascination and growing understanding. So when people criticize the monarchy as being outdated or irrelevant, they have no idea that we are actually protecting them from destruction. Precisely, said Elizabeth I, with a satisfied smile. The greatest victory we could achieve would be for people to complain that nothing exciting ever happens, that the world is boring and peaceful. Every day that passes without supernatural catastrophe is a day we have succeeded in our mission. Queen. Victoria walked over to a large chest that sat in one corner of the chamber. Kate had not noticed it before, but now she could see that it was covered with the same intricate carvings as the door they had entered through. Victoria opened the chest and removed what appeared to be two smaller versions of the crown jewels. Though these pieces looked much older and more mysterious than the ones Kate had seen in the Tower of London, "These are your training crowns," Victoria explained, carrying the ornate pieces back to where William and Kate stood. "You will need to learn to wear them and channel their power before you can be trusted with the greater responsibilities that await you." Kate looked at the smaller crown that Victoria held out to her. It was beautiful but somehow frightening at the same time, covered with gemstones that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "What will happen when I put it on?" Henry VIII chuckled at her nervousness. "You will begin to see the world as it truly is, not just as your human mind wants to believe it is. It may be overwhelming at first, but you will learn to control the visions and use them to identify threats." William reached out and took his training crown from Victoria's hands. The moment his fingers touched the metal, his eyes widened in surprise. "I can feel something," he said in wonder. "It is like electricity, but warm and alive." Queen Victoria nodded approvingly. "The crown recognizes your royal blood and responds to your presence. Now, both of you must put them on at the same time. The connection between a royal couple is one of the strongest magical bonds that exists." Kate took a deep breath and lifted her crown with both hands. It was heavier than she had expected, and she could feel the same warm electricity that William had described flowing through the metal. She looked at her husband, and he nodded encouragingly. "Together," William said, and they both placed their crowns on their heads at exactly the same moment. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Kate gasped as her vision exploded with new colors and sensations. She could suddenly see layers of reality that had been invisible before. The chamber around them was filled with streams of golden light that connected all the assembled monarchs, creating a web of power and protection that extended far beyond the room. William staggered slightly as the crown settled on his head, but he managed to stay upright. Through his enhanced vision, he could see that Kate was surrounded by her own aura of light, and lines of energy connected her crown to his in a pattern of incredible beauty and complexity. "Now you begin to understand," said Queen Victoria with pride in her voice. "The power you feel is not just your own, but the combined strength of every monarch who has ever worn the crown. You are connected to all of us, and through us, to the very essence of what it means to protect and serve." King George VI approached his great-grandson with obvious emotion. "From this moment forward, you will never be alone in facing the challenges ahead. We are always here, always watching, always ready to help you guard against the forces of darkness." Kate felt tears streaming down her face as she experienced the full magnitude of the responsibility they were accepting. But along with the fear, an overwhelming sense of duty, she also felt a deep peace and sense of purpose that she had never experienced before. This was what she had been born to do, even if she had not known it until now.